Hey English learners! Do you want to improve your English without boring textbooks? Then listen closely to this story. You'll pick up tons of real-world grammar and vocabulary almost without realizing it, just by enjoying an interesting situation. So hit subscribe, give this a like, and let's dive into today's awesome English story. Make sure to stay till the end and tell us in the comments what you learned or loved most. Andrew Tate woke up that morning feeling an unusual spark of excitement. Even though he was already used to living a life full of adrenaline, fast cars, sharp business deals, and non-stop travel, this day felt slightly different. Somewhere in his gut, he could sense it was going to be important. He moved through his villa in Bucharest, the marble floors cool beneath his feet, sunlight slicing through tall windows in long golden lines. Tristan Tate was already downstairs, casually scrolling through his phone at the giant dining table. There was a quiet intensity in the air. They both knew today was set aside for a private negotiation, something that had been brewing between them for weeks. The plan on the table wasn't just another small investment or casual side hustle. It was something bigger, something with the potential to reshape the way the brothers operated. They had spent countless nights talking about it in fragments, on balconies, beside pool tables, or during late drives through European highways. Now it was time to lay everything out formally. Before breakfast, Andrew stepped into his home gym for a quick routine. The weights clanged, the air smelled of rubber and sweat. It wasn't just about keeping his muscles sharp, it cleared his mind. With every rep, he rehearsed what he wanted to tell Tristan. He thought of possible objections, counterpoints, clever pivots. Negotiating with strangers was one thing, negotiating with his own brother was a different game entirely. Tristan finally put his phone down as Andrew entered the dining area. Without speaking, the two exchanged a look that held 1,000 unspoken sentences. It was like an internal signal, the kind that only brothers who had shared victories and setbacks could truly understand. Breakfast passed mostly in silence. The clinking of forks, the occasional splash of coffee being poured, and distant bird sounds from the garden filled the background. Andrew's mind kept drifting ahead, already outlining the meeting they'd have right after. Once they moved into Andrew's private office, things shifted. The space felt charged. This room was lined with dark wooden shelves packed with books on philosophy, psychology, economics, and biographies of powerful figures from every century. A large map of the world took up half of one wall, covered in tiny colored pins marking cities they'd touched with their businesses or adventures. Andrew leaned against the edge of his massive desk, arms folded. Tristan sat across from him in a leather chair, legs crossed, studying his brother's face carefully. They both knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. The core of the negotiation centered around a massive new online platform idea, one that combined entertainment, luxury branding, and an education component designed for an ultra-select membership. Andrew had sketched out the rough blueprint weeks ago. Tristan, ever the sharp analyst, had poked holes in it, suggested alterations, and tested every assumption. Today was about seeing if they could truly merge their visions or if the differences would prove too large. Andrew started by laying out the newest projections. He described how the initial subscriber base could be grown by leveraging not only their personal brands but also strategic alliances with influencers across Europe and North America. He pointed to charts that mapped out social media cross-promotion waves, each one designed to funnel traffic toward their platform. Tristan listened with an expression that didn't give much away. His fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair. Andrew knew this habit. It meant Tristan was thinking through every line, evaluating, measuring, calculating risk against reward. To keep the energy in the room strong, Andrew used a tactic he often relied on, painting vivid mental pictures. He described scenes of exclusive yacht parties that doubled as live content events. Imagine private networking retreats in remote villas streamed in high definition to members who paid a premium just to watch and learn. His words wove possibilities that felt both luxurious and cunning. Yet Tristan was not easily dazzled. Andrew respected that. It was one of the reasons they made such a powerful team. Tristan brought a certain cold precision that balanced Andrew's more aggressive, broad-scope style. When Tristan finally began to respond, he did so by pointing out logistical bottlenecks, the potential trouble with local regulations in multiple countries, the complexities of building payment systems that could handle discrete high-volume transactions across jurisdictions. Andrew nodded, taking it all in. Though some might see his posture as relaxed, internally he was racing through strategies, quietly revising elements of the proposal in real time. That was another trick he'd mastered, appearing absolutely at ease while his brain was running calculations at a blistering pace. Hours passed. Coffee was refilled over and over. Papers scattered across the desk, some pages covered in dense financial forecasts, others in messy hand-drawn funnels and audience segment sketches. Occasionally they stood to stretch or pace the room, hands moving through the air as if trying to physically catch the ideas floating between them. What made this negotiation unique was that it wasn't purely about money. For Andrew and Tristan, it was also about legacy. They had spent years building reputations that were both admired and criticized worldwide. This new venture had the potential to elevate their status into an even more rarefied realm, or, if poorly handled, to expose them to unprecedented levels of scrutiny. As the sun began to sink outside, its light turning from gold to a softer orange, the outlines of an agreement finally began to form. Tristan's objections weren't aimed at shutting the plan down, rather, they were designed to reinforce it, to build a structure that could truly endure the intense spotlight their names inevitably brought. Andrew realized this with a private thrill. The negotiation was going exactly where he hoped it would go, but on a stronger foundation than he could have achieved alone. By challenging him, Tristan had improved the entire concept. In that office, surrounded by books on empire and conquest, two brothers carved out the early skeleton of what they both suspected might become the biggest project of their lives. It was only the beginning, but already it felt electric. By the next morning, Andrew and Tristan were operating on minimal sleep. Neither of them could shut their minds off the night before, thoughts kept circling like hungry hawks. Even in those rare hours when they closed their eyes, ideas and risks danced through half-formed dreams. At breakfast, the atmosphere was calmer but charged in a new way. It was the calm of two people who had decided on a mission and were now preparing for the first real steps. Andrew scrolled through messages from his assistant, already seeing early inquiries from lawyers and digital architects eager to pitch their services. Tristan quietly reviewed a stack of printouts detailing compliance rules in countries they might eventually operate in. After they finished eating, they stepped out onto the wide stone patio that overlooked the garden. The air was sharp and carried a faint promise of rain. Andrew found that invigorating. He thrived on little signals like this, tiny reminders from nature that nothing stays static, everything shifts. It was the perfect backdrop for the kind of disruptive plan they were building. They started talking strategy again, this time more like co-generals than brothers. Andrew pushed for aggressive first-stage marketing, laying out how they could tap into global curiosity by offering teaser events in multiple countries at once. Tristan insisted on a softer approach for the initial weeks, wanting to avoid instant regulatory alarms. The compromise they landed on was almost elegant: launch a low-key invite-only beta in select European cities, gather testimonials, build buzz organically, then scale with a series of dramatic global announcements. Andrew admired how Tristan spotted pitfalls that others wouldn't have seen. For example, when Andrew proposed a flash series of crypto-backed giveaways to spike user signups, Tristan immediately flagged how that could raise unwanted financial authority questions. Instead, Tristan suggested a loyalty model that rewarded members for engagement milestones with exclusive content and in-person invitations, just as exciting for users but with fewer red flags. They paced the patio for nearly an hour, stepping over tiny puddles from last night's watering system, sometimes pausing to gesture at each other's points, sometimes standing silently as one of them thought through a problem. From a distance, anyone watching would have just seen two well-dressed men in casual shirts, hands shoved in pockets, lost in some private debate. Up close, it was obvious there was something powerful being crafted in their exchange. By mid-afternoon, they moved operations to a long wooden table set up under an ivy-covered pergola. Here, laptops came out, spreadsheets bloomed on screens, and the brothers called in a few trusted lieutenants over encrypted video chats. These were men and women they had worked with for years, people who understood discretion as much as they understood ambition. Andrew often leaned back, hands behind his head, letting Tristan run certain segments of the meeting. Tristan had a way of drilling into financial architecture that impressed even seasoned analysts. Meanwhile, Andrew watched everyone's faces, scanning for tiny tells, the nervous lip press, the darting eyes, the overconfident smirk. He believed half the art of negotiation was reading people better than they read themselves. As the hours crawled by, layers of the project peeled back. Questions emerged around content licensing, data privacy, local tax frameworks, the best jurisdictions for server farms, and contingency plans if any country tried to ban them outright. Andrew loved it. For him, these weren't problems, they were puzzles. Each challenge was a fresh chance to prove how far ahead they could think. At one point, rain finally broke through the clouds, a soft drizzle that splattered across their laptops and papers. They barely flinched. Tristan simply shifted the electronics under a wide umbrella. Andrew laughed lightly, saying it felt like a sign of baptism for the idea, let the world test it, let the skies pour, they'd still be standing. Later in the evening, the brothers retreated back into the villa, now lit with warm sconces along the walls. The mood grew more reflective. Andrew poured 2 glasses of something dark and expensive, handing one to Tristan. They didn't toast or clink glasses. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, they sat across from each other in heavy leather armchairs by a low table covered in more blueprints and notes. Andrew found himself tracing patterns on the rim of his glass, thinking about how all their past ventures, the good, the bad, the chaotic, had led them exactly here. Without realizing it, he began listing out loud the key pillars of what they'd agreed upon: exclusivity, adaptability, maximum discretion for their highest-tier members, and above all, storytelling. He stressed how stories weren't just entertainment, they were weapons. They shaped reputations, moved markets, toppled or crowned public figures. If they could control the narrative around this new empire from day one, they'd be nearly untouchable. Tristan didn't interrupt. He simply nodded slowly, a faint smirk pulling at the edge of his mouth. It was the look of someone who was both amused and deeply satisfied. To Andrew, it confirmed everything. This was more than a risky joint venture, it was a sharpened instrument they'd wield together. Not long after, they reviewed final numbers on projected cash flows, even running through worst-case scenarios if the platform faced coordinated attacks from media or governments. Andrew demonstrated how, under his proposed multi-leg corporate shell system, even an all-out assault wouldn't collapse their core operations. Tristan counterchecked each assumption, poking until he was sure it held. At some stage, a housekeeper tiptoed in to light candles and refresh their water. Neither brother acknowledged her beyond a polite nod. Their minds were too deep in the architecture of ambition. When the house grew quiet again, they drifted into talking about unrelated things: a mutual friend's outrageous gambling loss, a new supercar Andrew wanted to fly in from Italy, rumors of property auctions in Monaco. Yet even here, threads of the negotiation remained. Every anecdote seemed to loop back into lessons about risk, timing, or public perception. By the time they decided to wrap up for the night, the villa felt like it was holding its breath. Papers lay scattered everywhere, as if the house itself had become an accomplice to their scheme. The candles flickered, sending soft shadows dancing along the ceiling, almost like silent applause for the blueprint that had taken shape. Andrew stood, stretched, and caught Tristan's eye. Without needing to say it, they both understood the next day would be the true test. That's when they'd start assembling external teams, filing strategic corporate documents, and locking down digital infrastructure. And even though it was technically still a plan, fragile and full of unknowns, it already felt real. In fact, it felt inevitable. In the days following the agreement, Washington remained a city on edge. While the White House projected calm confidence, beyond its gates there was a different kind of atmosphere. Analysts inside think tanks pored over satellite feeds and customs data, hoping to catch early signs of whether Mexico would truly deliver on its new promises. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle called private meetings to evaluate how the arrangement might impact their districts. Some worried that the mere threat of future tariffs was still enough to unsettle local manufacturers and farm cooperatives. Others saw the moment as a victory, proof that assertive negotiation could lead to quick results without a prolonged economic war. Meanwhile, inside the West Wing, Trump's advisors prepared thick packets of charts and regional updates for the president. Every morning, he reviewed maps marked with small colored pins representing apprehensions along various border sectors. He traced these with his finger, silently noting where the lines dipped or spiked. From Mexico, the initial reports were cautiously optimistic. Local commanders filed orders to expand highway checkpoints. Temporary camps were set up to process groups of migrants, complete with medical tents and administrative trailers. Even Mexican television broadcast stories showing rows of newly arrived security forces fanning out across dusty roads. For the moment, appearances seemed to support the claims made in the Rose Garden. But Trump understood better than most that appearances could be misleading. His years in real estate had taught him how easy it was to stage a site visit, polish a lobby, shine the brass, only to hide structural cracks deeper inside. So he pushed his team to keep verifying, to insist on detailed field intelligence and not just diplomatic memos. At the same time, markets continued their nervous dance. Wall Street indices drifted up by small margins, regaining ground lost in the anxiety of the previous weeks. Agricultural futures stabilized, offering a sigh of relief to farmers in states like Iowa and Nebraska. Still, cautious investors hedged their bets, wary that any sudden breakdown might revive tariff threats overnight. One quiet afternoon, Trump held a closed-door session with economic advisors and trade specialists. In that room, beneath the watchful eyes of past presidents whose portraits lined the walls, they discussed fallback strategies. What penalties could be reimposed if Mexico stalled? How might American importers adjust their supply chains if forced? Trump listened intently, nodding, tapping a pen against his briefing folder. This was the calculus he liked best: leverage, consequence, and potential upside. At the same time, social pressure mounted in subtle but persistent ways. News outlets highlighted individual migrant stories, sometimes framing them in emotional ways that tested the public's patience for hardline border controls. Human rights groups raised alarms about the living conditions in makeshift Mexican camps. Across talk shows and online forums, debates flared about how to balance compassion with law enforcement. Inside the Oval Office, however, Trump focused on tangible metrics. His communications staff prepared statements that emphasized job security, national sovereignty, and a shared interest with Mexico in curbing dangerous smuggling networks. When he later reviewed these talking points, he adjusted sentences with a practiced eye, striking words that sounded weak, replacing them with phrases that carried more weight. By the end of the first month, preliminary figures showed a modest downturn in crossings. Homeland Security issued cautious remarks, suggesting it was too early to declare victory but acknowledging the trends were moving in a favorable direction. Trump accepted these updates with reserved satisfaction. He knew the numbers were fragile. A single local policy shift in Mexico could swing them back again. As July pressed on, the White House organized a quiet dinner for several key trade envoys and domestic industry leaders. Held in a softly lit hall with long white-clothed tables, the evening had the atmosphere of a truce after battle. Plates of grilled salmon and tender vegetables were served alongside light French wines. There was polite laughter, gentle clinking of glasses, but beneath it all lay a shared understanding of just how narrowly they had avoided a serious trade rupture. Trump moved from table to table, shaking hands, listening closely as manufacturing executives explained their long-term concerns about labor costs, or how farmers described the logistics of shipping grain through Gulf ports. Though the negotiations with Mexico were largely done, the broader economic chessboard was still in motion, full of competing interests. Late that night, back in the residence, Trump stood by a window that overlooked Pennsylvania Avenue. The street lamps below cast quiet pools of light on the pavement, where only a few cars passed at this hour. In moments like this, he felt the peculiar solitude of leadership most sharply, the sense that every handshake, every signature, rippled outward far beyond any one meeting room. He thought about the Mexican officials he had sat across from. Professionals, certainly, but also men under intense political strain from their own voters. Just as he would soon have to face rallies across American towns, defending how these agreements were protecting local jobs and reducing illegal activity. By the time he turned away from the glass, it was well past midnight. The White House halls were nearly silent, save for the occasional echo of a Secret Service radio or the distant rumble of air systems deep within the building. Trump reviewed one last intelligence brief left on his desk, confirming that Mexican National Guard units had intercepted several small migrant caravans earlier that day. A small piece of paper, a simple typed paragraph, yet it encapsulated thousands of human journeys paused by policy. He switched off the light, knowing tomorrow would bring new questions from the press, new demands from industries still wary of tariffs. The story of these negotiations was far from over. It was merely the opening chapter in a longer saga of cross-border cooperation, tension, and relentless economic maneuvering. They clinked glasses, not dramatically, just a soft meeting of crystal in the candlelight. A promise sealed in quiet solidarity. Then they each sent off the first wave of critical emails and encrypted chats. Watching the tiny spinning icons that confirmed delivery, Andrew felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. That was it. The point of no return. Afterward, they didn't say much. They simply gathered a few folders, shut down the main laptops, and left the rest of the mess to deal with in the morning. As they walked upstairs, the villa lights dimmed behind them, shadows stretching across the floor like silent sentries guarding the newborn empire. Up in his private suite, Andrew stepped out onto the balcony one last time before bed. Below him, the gardens lay still, silvered by moonlight. In that quiet, he could almost hear the machinery of their future whirring to life. All across the world, lawyers drafting papers, servers humming in cold data centers, curious insiders whispering to friends about a secretive new venture by two of the most unpredictable brothers on the global stage. And standing there in the soft night air, Andrew realized with absolute certainty, whatever else came, scrutiny, praise, scandal, or fortune, they'd built it together. and that was all that ever mattered. By the way, if you've been listening to this story, you've actually picked up tons of natural English phrases, storytelling transitions, and advanced structures without even realizing it. That's the magic of learning through stories. If you want more thrilling stories like this every single day to level up your English while having fun, make sure you hit the subscribe button, drop a like, and ring that little bell so you never miss a story. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think of Andrew and Tristan's risky plan. Would you join them or run the other way? Let's chat down there.